All right, thanks everyone for joining. This is the weekly Jupyter Frontends Accessibility meeting. Yeah, so glad you're all here. We have a couple topics on the agenda, one for William to talk about gnats, and Andre also wanted to give an update on the triaging call. If anyone else has any agenda items, feel free to add to the agenda, and the link to the agenda is in chat. William, do you want to kick it off
Sure.
with an overview of gnats?
Yeah, I mean, this is like a 2-minute overview, but I've been recently learning a lot about NATs, mainly for the purpose of improving the communication layer in CoCalc, but I think it could also be useful technology to, learn about if you're a JupyterLab developer, because it could be potentially very useful in some aspects of JupyterLab. But basically, it's a pub sub system that's been around for like 15 or 20 years, but it's got a lot of recent momentum due to a persistence layer that they added to it about 3 years ago called Jetstream. And also it has extremely good WebSocket support. So most communications over TCP, and you can connect via TCP, but you can also connect via WebSocket. And it has clients in all major languages, which is really nice in that you can sort of equally connect via JavaScript or Go or Python or whatever else. These are all first-class clients. So it's also extremely observable. So you can look at all the messages that travel over the system. And it's the sort of thing, if you play around with it a bit, you start thinking, I should get rid of all use of WebSockets via direct WebSocket libraries and just do everything over NATs. Don't use HTTP. For the most part, just use NATs if possible for the messaging type layer. And I don't know, everybody you see who's giving a talk about using NATs says that. So it's like, it's an impressive piece of technology. It's also distributed in that you can have a whole bunch of different NAT servers connected to each other, possibly distributed geographically, and it will transparently route messages from any one client to any other client. So it solves a lot of problems. It's weirdly unknown and not very popular. And yeah, my hypothesis is the name isn't very good. It sounds a lot like network address translation or something, but that's not what it is at all. And yeah, my best guess is people who really learn about it think it's so good that it gives them a major competitive advantage. So I don't want to tell anybody. I'm just kind of being silly, but it's a really cool thing, and I just recommend taking a look at it. And I could see it being useful in some way for the Jupyter project. I haven't used it in production at all yet. So that's a big caveat. And literally right before this call, I was reporting what I think is a serious bug in one of the clients where so there's some potential issues to be aware of. But the other thing is it's completely open source, of course. So thanks.
The quick question, the Jetstream allows the only once delivery promise, is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
How well does that persistence layer seem to work? No complaints, or does it bog down under load? Or
so literally the bug I just reported was in order to do at least once delivery, the clients have to send back an acknowledgement. And in the JavaScript client, the default is that it doesn't send back an acknowledgement. And the default according to the docs is that it should send back an acknowledgement. And so it disagrees with the documentation. So I was reporting that as a bug literally a half hour ago because I ran into that. And I was really surprised that updates are being dropped. But yeah, the key value stores, it's impressive. I mean, for every single read or write, it requires an asynchronous request over the network. So it's obviously going to be a lot slower than like using SQLite locally or something like that. But with the appropriate caveats, you can do things like give me all the keys and the corresponding values which match some pattern. So there's a lot of cool things you can do like that, and you can do it very efficiently. Although if you try to just do like the obvious default thing based on the docs, it might be very slow. So you have to, maybe try a whole bunch of different things to understand what's going on. And then it's possible to do anything really quickly. So yeah, it's really cool. And their model for consistency is you can actually distribute the key value store over multiple servers, and these RAF to have like a leader, and they have like they only acknowledge a write when it's guaranteed and written to disk. So they have a really good consistency model. And moreover, whenever you give a write, you can also give a sequence number. So you'll know whether somebody else wrote something, so that the value you're writing is different than what you like. Basically, you can read and then write something back that's a modification of what you just read, and it'll either succeed if nobody else wrote something in the meantime, or it will fail, telling you that somebody else wrote something in the meantime. So having that guarantee from the server is very nice. So I hope that answers your question, Jason.
Yep, cool. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a great layer on which to build other things, basically. It's a good foundation.
So Nick in the chat said there's no wheels on PyPI. So just a comment. I guess any other questions for William or feedback team before we move on? All right, we'll move on to the second topic. Andre, do you want to talk about the bug bash?
Yep, sure. Just 1 second. Okay. Hey folks. So let me quickly share my screen. mm, So thank you everyone who participated and either in the bug bash or in the review or looking at the problems. We're looking at the separate issues. So we had a bug bash last week. We tested I released the bug bash guide, right, where I tried to enumerate all the major user flows and ask participating people, 17 people participated, to go through them, giving special attention to the things that were added in 4.4, like markdown rendering or like mermaid new chart type rendering. Radar, I think the type of the chart is called. So we tested that, and these are the 4 issues we discovered. So layout not persisting in one instance. Safari help menu on Safari in some instances have more items than it's supposed to do. This one needs more info, but it's about copy pasting in terminal. I talked to Steve. He'll create an issue with more info about this. And finally, this one. So this is essentially the issue. If you will look into it, essentially when you do create a new notebook, do escape to change the mode, right, and press A. In Safari, it would not always cleanly add a new cell when you press A. Sometimes you need to press A twice and so on. So it was mentioned by Mike that activating this flag, request title callback, fixes this in Safari. It does fix it, so I can confirm it. Let me see. Let me open the can I use page for this feature. So it's listed as supported in Safari Technology Preview. I installed Safari Technology Preview on my other Mac machine, and you still need to activate the request idle callback manually. So I updated to the latest macOS Sequoia 15.4 and downloaded the latest technology preview. So it still needs to be manually activated, request idle callback. So I just kind of wanted to give the summary about this issue. I see a comment that was added now that in 15.4 this fix is not working. In my experience, in my testing experience, it does work in 18.4, as well as 18.3 and in technology preview, activating request idle callback.
So I think that person meant that it doesn't work by default.
Oh, yeah.
Which is what I was suggesting a few comments earlier was that because there was a merge into WebKit to activate that option, I expected that 18.4 would have included it by default, but apparently this didn't happen for whatever reason. And unfortunately, unless you are working on Safari or inside Apple, it's very difficult to understand which WebKit version corresponds to which Safari release. And I discussed that in this thread before. So yeah, it's difficult to know whether this will ship soon or what is the plan for it.
Yeah, exactly. I also tried to look into version of the WebKit and connect it with particular version of the Safari. It wasn't that straightforward. I wasn't able to figure it out. So I guess the question stands taking into account that like that it's fixable by the experimental feature. Should this still be viewed as I don't know, high severity? I mean, are there other sustainable ways to fix this? I don't know.
Yes,
I wanted to
yes,
discuss
there
it.
are. So there is a couple of things that we can do. One is the bug is not that much in Safari. Safari just doesn't support request idle callback, but we have a shim for it, which was actually based on whatever Mozilla was recommending in MDN documentation a couple of years back. And apparently this does not fire at some times, so it's insufficient. If someone had a Safari and could debug that and try to fix this fallback implementation that we have, maybe that would solve it. Another way to solve it is to detect whether request idle callback is defined on window and then automatically switch the windowing mode to defer, which is known to be working in Safari regardless of whether this experimental feature is enabled or not. Which is like I would have fixed that already, but frankly I do not have a Mac, and therefore I cannot use Safari to develop against it. So yeah, that's one challenge for supporting Safari.
You see, Mike, thank you. I have a Mac. So would you say by reading the thread, are both like approaches, shim fixing and switching windowing mode, are both of them mentioned in the thread?
Yes, both of them are described. I described them a couple of months back. I think if you were to approach that and try to fix it, fixing request idle callback fallback would mean that the users of Safari still benefit from full windowing mode performance enhancements, so that would be preferred. But if you try debugging that and cannot solve it, then maybe we should like make a special case auto windowing mode, which switches between full and defer depending on whether they are using Safari or rather whether this function is available.
Okay, yep. Thank you, Mike. I'll try to give it a look in the next couple of days.
All right, thanks so much, Andre, for going through that and for helping to lead the bug bash. Any other questions about that team?
I don't know if anyone else would like to give this a look. Please do and comment in the thread. It would be nice to fix it, I guess.
Okay, good one. All right, next up is Mike to talk about JupyterLab releases.
Yeah, so we had RC0 for some time now. I've managed to squeeze a couple of bug fixes, and RC1 is out. We are overdue with releasing final version of 4.40, but I think we can do that tomorrow if during the testing there is nothing else flagged. I know that there were some things that downstream applications such as JupyterLab or Notebook will benefit from, so not many user-facing changes except for some small performance bug fixes and one major fix which is related to scrolling, so that when JupyterLab Mist extension is installed, it will no longer jump around when scrolling. So yeah, I would appreciate any more testing. There is a gist on GitHub allowing to open it in Binder easily for a quick online test without installation. And if there's no objections by tomorrow evening, I will cut a final release. Moving on to something less Jupyter Frontends, but related to Jupyter kernels is IPython. I'm planning to release IPython 9.1 tomorrow. Now, one of the major additions is the notebook line magic, which already allowed to export the current session, like all the commands that you typed in IPython since starting the terminal, to a notebook. Now will allow to export the outputs and anything that was printed. So basically, just to smoothly move from an IPython session into a notebook without the need to recreate that. And I think this is a great feature. Now, some of the downstream tests were initially failing because of the complexity of capturing the stream. So standard output and standard error. IPyKernel has its own way of capturing streams, and we in IPython cannot interfere with that. So we cannot swap the stream object because we would be breaking IPyKernel logic. The way we solve that for now is we only swap the write method, and we don't care about input. That's like too complex a case to solve right now. But I would be I will be on my toes monitoring what happens after this release, and if there is anything, and if we need to yank it, I will be pretty quick to yank it. And just wanted to flag that there is this very exciting feature, and I think it will not break anything because all the tests are passing, but it is touching the streams, which are pretty core to how IPyKernel makes the results that are printed or logged available, and other kernels which derive or reuse IPython might also have some specific edge cases. If you are interested, I can give you more details, but otherwise just look out for 9.1.
Great, thanks, Mike. Any feedback, questions for Mike about JupyterLab or IPython?
Is there a link to the release notes somewhere?
For IPython, not yet. There will be. I'm yet to write them down.
Okay, cool.
But because it's 9.1 is very small release compared to 9.0, so it will be basically that plus 2 other PRs.
I saw Jason and chat also said thanks for taking over IPython releases, so that's awesome. Anything else for Mike before we move on, team?
Not necessarily to Mike, but just generally about 4.4 release. I've seen Jeremy had a YouTube video with overview of new features. So maybe that or whatever else like Jupyter Frontends group thinks is best. We can publish something on blog and on social media about 4.4 release potentially to like promote it and give it more publicity. Maybe overview of new features.
I think we still plan to do the regular blog post for announcing releases, right?
Yeah, I think we should work on this blog post next week. So I think the way that we did it last time, I'm not sure if last 2 times we did it, was we did a silent release and only then published blog posts after making sure that there is like nothing else popping up.
Yeah, and this time we are almost on track with JupyterLab being using like the latest notebook and the lab releases. So I was hoping that we could even inline this, try the new releases directly with JupyterLab, like somewhere in the blog post. That would be easier. For example, the code consoles improvements are definitely usable in Light, so that would be something useful to have. So I'm hoping that 1 week after the JupyterLab final release, we will have also a release for JupyterLab, but we are also trying to make some changes in JupyterLab at the moment when it comes to fixing like access to the files from the kernels over the service worker. So I'm hoping that this won't take too much time, but yeah. But since it's a new major release, then it's also a good time to do these kind of changes. So yeah. For the blog post, maybe we could start like the Google Docs. I think that's what we were using before.
Yeah, I think that was very nice because everyone could comment on that.
Yeah, and we could inline the images, like the screenshots. And then I think copy pasting to Medium is easier this way. Cool.
Great, thank you.
Okay, good topic. Anything else before moving on? Okay, and then under additional discussions, Nicholas Brichette has a couple topics about Jupyter collaboration.
Yeah, thank you. So I think currently when using Jupyter collaboration in JupyterLab, there is no way to change the username. So we have like anonymous username, and maybe if we are logged in using Jupyter Hub, we can have a real name there. But I was wondering if there is a reason for that to not be able to change it in JupyterLab. Because I just found 2 issues with not much comment. And so I was wondering if there was something about security issue or if there was some discussion about that anywhere else.
I recall I discussed that with Brian and with David on Jupyter AI, because Jupyter AI does override the username. So there may be a closed issue where we went through different considerations, like what do we want to do in the case of a single machine, and what do we want to do in case of Jupyter Hub. And of course, on Jupyter Hub, it is important that users should not be allowed to change their username in certain scenarios. Like if it's a classroom, they shouldn't be able to impersonate others. But for a single server, like Jupyter Server, I think it is possible to change identity provider, maybe even identity provider arguments from the command line. but it is indeed not exposed in the UI, and we would need to have some logic to determine like when these changes can be applied. I think like this information comes primarily from /me endpoint, if I'm not mistaken. So this change kind of needs to happen on the server side.
Yeah, I think this is it. So do you think these are a JEP to discuss the way it should, or JEP, or I don't know, more discussion about the way it should be implemented to be able to, when it should be allowed to change the name and
So to me, it seems like if there isn't already, maybe there should be just a tritlet on Jupyter server level. Because if you are running Jupyter server locally, you can change tritlets and you can add them in the command line invocation or create a config file easily. And in Jupyter Hub, if you are a user, you do not have access to that. So that seems good to me. But maybe that should be discussed on a Jupyter server call rather than here. I don't know.
so when you mean a tweet, you mean like a tweet to be able to change the username?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
So basically a configuration option like c.identityprovider.name and having that should be enough. If that's not what you are looking for, I don't know. Would you like it to be customizable in the user interface, or is changing that before starting server good enough?
So I was thinking about the user interface because you can still have several users logged in the same server. So I was more thinking about a UI component to be able to change it in certain situation, not every time, of course.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. I think we do not need a JEP at this stage, but maybe a more detailed proposal to discuss.
Okay.
Okay, any other comments about that topic, anyone? Thanks, Nicholas. Any other topics that didn't make it on the agenda before I stop the recording and we can have some offline discussion if anyone wants to? Okay, I'll go ahead and stop the recording.